A Disney movie that opens with electroshock therapy, an action hero who's secretly the useless sidekick. A film so dark it nearly killed its own legendary studio. These weren't just box office bombs, they were glorious failures that became immortal 80s classics. Take a film like 1985's Ladyhawke. This is what happens when you make a timeless medieval fairy tale and score it with the most aggressively 80s synthesizer rock imaginable. By all accounts, this picture should have printed money. You had Richard Donner directing a cast at the height of their powers: Rutger Hauer, Michelle Pfeiffer, Matthew Broderick. The film had pedigree, yet it was a certified bomb, failing to recoup its $20 million budget. And while everyone points a finger at that baffling synth rock score, and yeah, it's a huge problem, the truth is, that was just the final symptom. The studio had no clue how to sell it. Was it a serious romance, a swashbuckling adventure, or a Matthew Broderick comedy? The confused campaign and its awful trailers gave audiences no clear reason to buy a ticket, and that infamous soundtrack became the final choice that confirmed the film's identity crisis. Theaters wrote it off, but on worn-out VHS tapes, the film found its footing. It became a word-of-mouth classic, discovered one rental at a time, proving its core was simply too strong to stay buried. It had to be. It wasn't just fighting its own confused marketing, it was released into a fantasy genre that was already collapsing. Proof that a film this good can outlive every bad decision made on its behalf. The story behind The Beastmaster is a weird miracle of television. This film didn't find an audience in theaters. It had one force-fed to it by cable television, and it worked. In its theatrical run, this movie was a ghost. Critics dismissed it as a low-rent Conan knockoff, and the numbers backed them up. $9 million spent, not even that much returned. By every measure, it should have disappeared without a trace. But the producers had made a strange, forward-thinking move. They pre-sold the cable rights to HBO and the broadcast rights to TBS in a package that basically let the networks air it on repeat. And that's exactly what they did. Through the 80s, the Beastmaster was everywhere. Homesick from school? There it was. Saturday afternoon? On again. I can still picture those ferrets stealing the show, because I must have watched that final battle 100 times. It wasn't audience demand that made this film stick. It was exposure, endless exposure, that turned a flop into a cult memory. By the end of the decade, everyone knew the Beastmaster, whether they liked it or not. The Beastmaster is the ultimate proof that if you show something to people enough times, they won't just watch it, they'll end up loving it. Forget everything you think you know about 80s fantasy. The mission statement behind 1981's Dragonslayer was simple and revolutionary for its time. Make a fantasy film that felt completely real. Their commitment to this grim reality was absolute. Magic is unreliable, the heroes are flawed. The undisputed star was the dragon, Vermithrax pejorative, which roughly translates to the worm who makes things worse. And I'm telling you, this is still the most convincing, badass, terrifying dragon ever put to film. Before CGI, this was all handmade, a masterpiece of practical effects from the wizards at ILM. They pioneered Go Motion and used 16-foot hydraulic models to create something that felt less like a puppet and more like a piece of hostile, fire-breathing wildlife. But that same authenticity was its poison pill at the box office. As a co-production between Paramount and Disney, it was a film without a country, marketed to everyone, and therefore no one. It was too bleak and bloody for the Disney family crowd, but too deliberately paced for the action junkies who wanted Conan. So it flopped. Its legacy among filmmakers, however, is immense, precisely because it refused to compromise. A grim reminder that sometimes building the greatest movie monster of all time isn't enough. There are a million movie lists online. This is where you find the ones that actually count. Hit subscribe to VintageVerse. The story of 1986's Highlander is a classic Hollywood paradox. This film had all the right ingredients to be a hit, but the studio had no idea what kind of meal they were serving. Look at what was in the mix. A century-spanning tale about an immortal Scotsman. Sean Connery playing a Spaniard with an Egyptian name and a Scottish accent. A thunderous soundtrack from Queen that turned the whole thing into a rock opera. It was lightning in a bottle, but the bottle was the wrong shape, and the studio couldn't figure out how to open it. What followed was a total identity crisis. They tried to sell it as everything at once, which meant it reached no one. The movie limped through its US release, making under $13 million against a $19 million budget. But mythology that sharp doesn't vanish. There can be only one. It wasn't just a tagline. It was the foundation of a world that fans wanted to live in. On VHS, the film found its real audience, and those endless rentals told the true story. Fans latched onto the lore, replayed it endlessly, and willed it into a franchise the studio never saw coming. It's the wrong director, with the wrong cast, making all the right mistakes. The fundamental miscalculation behind 1985's Return to Oz is legendary. Disney sold this as a sequel to the happiest movie ever made, and delivered one of the most effective horror films of the decade. The problem was baked into the creative choice. Director Walter Murch wasn't interested in riffing on the Technicolor optimism of the 1939 classic. He went straight to the darker tone of L. Frank Baum's novels. The result is jarring. Dorothy begins in a psychiatric hospital facing electroshock therapy, and when she finally makes it to Oz, it's not a dreamland, but a wasteland. The new villains are shrieking wheelers, nightmare fuel on skates, and Princess Mombi, who casually swaps out severed heads from her glass cases. And this was sold to kids. Families expecting a sing-along sequel got a bleak gothic horror, and Disney paid the price. The movie cost $25 million and clawed back less than half of it, while parents fumed about traumatized children. I was one of those kids. It left a mark. But here's the irony. The very qualities that doomed it then are what make it powerful now. Return to Oz doesn't dilute its own darkness. It treats fantasy as something terrifying, surreal, and unforgettable. A perfect film that was simply sold to the entirely wrong planet. To understand John Carpenter's career, you have to understand the war he fought with Hollywood. The key battle was 1986's Big Trouble in Little China. This wasn't just a movie, it was a clash between a director ahead of his time and a studio already behind. Carpenter's approach was subversive. He cast Kurt Russell as Jack Burton, the hero, and then proceeded to make him the least competent character in the film. While ancient wizards and kung fu masters battled epic wars, Jack stumbled, offered terrible advice, and generally got in the way. For 20th Century Fox, this was heresy. They'd paid for an action hero, and Carpenter gave them a comic buffoon. After disastrous test screenings, the studio panicked. The marketing buried the comedy, and audiences never got what Carpenter was doing. Box office returns were brutal, $11.1 million on a $20 million budget. The experience left Carpenter wary of the studio system for years. But on home video, everything changed. Fans finally saw the joke, embraced the absurdity, and understood that this wasn't a failure. It was a razor-sharp satire of the very genre it appeared to emulate. The studio thought they were burying a failure. They were actually planting a legend. There are two versions of the story of 1985's legend. In one, Ridley Scott set out to craft the ultimate fairy tale. The other is a cautionary tale of studio interference. Fresh off Alien and Blade Runner, Scott delivered a dark, meditative European cut, scored by Jerry Goldsmith's sweeping orchestral music. Universal executives watched it, panicked, and decided American audiences wouldn't get it. The US release was nearly 20 minutes shorter, and Goldsmith's score was replaced entirely with the synth-heavy Tangerine Dream soundtrack. A dark fable became a pop music video. Watching the two versions back-to-back is jarring. The American cut feels hollowed out, a ghost of the film it could have been. Box office? $14.6 million on a $24.5 million budget. For years, the movie's reputation rested almost solely on Tim Curry's performance as the Lord of Darkness, a show-stealing, terrifying presence that anchored everything. Eventually, Scott's original vision resurfaced, proving the masterpiece had been there all along, patiently waiting for audiences to catch up. A film so visually powerful it survived being released in two different bodies. To understand the Disney renaissance of the 90s, you first have to understand the near-death experience that came before it. That was 1985's The Black Cauldron. This wasn't just a box office bomb, it was an existential threat that almost shut down Disney animation entirely. By the early 80s, the studio was floundering. The Black Cauldron was their all-or-nothing bet, a $44 million attempt at a dark fantasy epic. Production spiraled into chaos, with battles between the old guard and a new generation of animators. When Jeffrey Katzenberg, the new studio chairman, saw the final cut, he panicked. Famously, he took scissors to the film negative himself, cutting out 12 minutes and leaving the story fragmented and incoherent. You can feel the missing pieces even today. The movie earned just $21 million and was locked away in Disney's vault for over a decade. But that struggle is what cemented its legend. Its forbidden status, combined with a genuinely terrifying villain in the Horned King, made it a badge of honor for fans seeking the darker side of Disney. This is the film Disney had to nearly die making to learn how to live again. Some movies are minimalist, others are maximalist. And then there's 1983's Krull. This is what happens when a studio decides to build a franchise by tossing every popular 80s trope into a blender and hitting puree. The studio threw everything at the wall. Want Star Wars? Laser blasters, alien fortresses? Want fantasy? Mystical quests, a cyclops, shapeshifters, undead soldiers, and horses that leave trails of fire. The budget ballooned to $27 million, but the final product was so tonally confused, so overstuffed, that audiences didn't know what to make of it. Box office returns? A pitiful $16.5 million. And yet, you can't hate it. Krull is too committed, too earnest in its madness. Its cult reputation isn't about misunderstood genius, it's about capturing 80s ambition in pure chaotic form. And yes, the glaive exists, that impossibly impractical spinning bladed star of a weapon. Iconic, ridiculous, perfect. Krull is a glorious, magnificent, and incredibly expensive failure. I want to tell you about a film that should have been the biggest thing in the world. The movie was 1986's Labyrinth. With Jim Henson, George Lucas, and David Bowie behind it, it wasn't just supposed to be a hit, it was supposed to be invincible. But the final film was a strange, melancholy fairy tale. A story about the pains of leaving childhood behind, too mature for kids and too whimsical for adults. It wasn't the joyful romp of the Muppets, and it wasn't the epic adventure of Star Wars. Caught in the middle, it became a beautiful orphan of a film, and the marketing team had no idea how to raise it. The numbers were brutal, a $25 million budget returning just $13.7 million domestically. The failure reportedly devastated Henson personally, and yet you can see his heart in every frame. The creature work is breathtaking, but the film's real life began where all the strange, beautiful orphans of the 80s ended up, on VHS. On video shelves, it wasn't a failed blockbuster. It was a secret handshake, a personal myth passed quietly from one kid to another. Labyrinth is a film that had to fail in public to be truly loved in private. That's my take. Now I want to hear yours. What's the one glorious 80s bomb you'll defend to the death? Drop it in the comments and subscribe to VintageVerse for more.